All right, let's get right into this explainer on a fascinating short story by Jordan R. titled Blind Flush. What we're going to unpack today is a really uncomfortable but incredibly insightful look into the mechanics of modern urban alienation. We'll be diving into how exactly we survive the sheer messiness of other people and what happens when our carefully constructed systems for ignoring that mess just inevitably break down.
To get us started, look at this single, absolutely chilling line from our source material. Living with strangers requires ignorance. It perfectly captures the narrator's core philosophy for surviving the everyday realities of life. I mean, it's not just some passing thought for him. It is a rigid, non-negotiable mandate. For this narrator, who's an older guy forced by his financial situation to live with younger roommates, ignorance isn't just a lack of knowledge, it's an active, deliberate strategy. It's literally his shield against the world.
So let's break this down. Layer 1, the ritual of ignorance. To really grasp this mindset, we have to peel back the curtain on the most surface-level behavior in the story,
Which is a highly specific, honestly borderline obsessive bathroom routine. The narrator employs what we can call the blind flush. Now look, if you've ever had a terrible roommate, you can probably relate to needing a coping mechanism, but this guy takes it to an absolute extreme. Because his roommates constantly forget to flush the toilet, he's developed this three-step defense mechanism against their questionable hygiene. Step 1. Keep the lid closed. Step 2. Flush the toilet blind. And step 3, only then, once the water has safely done its job, do you raise the lid. He does this purposefully to avoid the visual shock of whatever his roommates might have left behind. It's a physical act of erasing someone else's presence before he even has to acknowledge it.
And notice the incredibly precise vocabulary he uses to describe what he's avoiding. A bowl of urine, a desiccated log, the residual ejaculate. It's so clinical, right? Using this elevated language to describe such visceral, gross things is just a brilliant illustration of his attempt to intellectualize his disgust. If he can describe the mess like some detached scientist observing a petri dish, well, then he can maintain a sense of control and superiority over it.
Moving on to Layer 2, Graveyard Shift Alienation. We really have to ask ourselves, what drives this deep obsession with control and avoidance? Where is all this intense alienation coming from?
Well, it starts with his schedule. His totally bizarre working hours at the utility company completely decouple him from normal human rhythms. I mean, he leaves for work at 4 p.m. just as his roommates are getting home, and his shift doesn't end until 2 a.m. As he notes in the story, the human brain just isn't meant to sleep when the sun is up. This completely inverted schedule turns the city into a hostile, isolated landscape. His whole existence becomes this endless waiting game, biologically completely out of sync with the rest of society, which forces him to navigate this dark, empty world on his walk home every night. And in this nocturnal world, he survives by categorizing absolutely everyone he meets into these sterile, detached little groups. He identifies the harmless scavengers, people digging in dumpsters who are easily deterred by a loose lock, versus the ambush predators, the more industrious opportunists checking every single car door handle in the dark. He classifies human beings like wildlife in a documentary. And why? Well, it's a way to mentally manage his extreme vulnerability out there on those dangerous, unlit streets.
That brings us to Layer 3, projection and superiority. Because, you see, this intense judgment and this desperate need to categorize people isn't just reserved for strangers in dark alleys.
It follows him right through the front door of his own apartment. To truly understand his intense reaction to his younger roommates, we need to talk about psychological projection. We've all done it at some point, right? Projection is that classic defense mechanism where we take our own deeply uncomfortable feelings, things like shame, powerlessness, or a lingering sense of failure, and we project them outward onto other people.
Just look at how he frames his entire worldview. He sharply contrasts his strict, hyper-disciplined nocturnal life with his roommate's messy, what he dismissively calls bohemian lifestyle. They lock themselves out of the apartment, they burn casseroles into literal lumps of coal in the oven, they play broken record players, and they host women during the day. He frames their failure to flush the toilet not just as a mildly annoying bad habit, but as this deep, fundamental moral failing. They are the chaotic other, and by painting them that way, it allows him to cast himself as the civilized, dignified center of the universe. Which leads us to Layer 4, the performance of dignity. This right here is the hidden core of the whole story. Why does he have this desperate, frankly exhausting need to feel superior? What is he actually hiding from himself?
It comes down to one thing:
profound shame. As a man of a certain age, he feels the deep, very real sting of economic failure. Society basically expects a man of his age to be established, fully independent, and entirely self-sufficient. But instead, reality hits hard. He is trapped in a shared apartment, absolutely needing these younger roommates just to cover his portion of the rent, all while working a dead-end night shift.
Because he feels financially and socially trapped, he relies entirely on an exhausting performance of dignity. Just look at this elaborate illusion of control he builds, using that elevated clinical vocabulary we talked about, taking super precise, constantly varied walking routes to avoid those predators, deliberately pretending not to see people being intimate in the dark alleys, hiding in his room to avoid his roommate's guests. These aren't just quirky personality traits. They are strict, rigid rules of deliberate ignorance, designed to mask his total, terrifying lack of actual control over his own life.
Yet, no matter how hard you try, a dignified facade is going to crack eventually. And this is so brilliantly illustrated when the narrator, who, remember, is constantly condemning everyone else for their lack of boundaries and basic decency, hypocritically snoops through a female guest's bag left out in the living room. He's digging through her loose pads, gum, and perfume, and he justifies it in his head as an investigation. It's wild. He demands these incredibly strict boundaries from the rest of the world, yet he violates them the very second he thinks no one is looking.
And that massive contradiction triggers layer 5, a failure of self-awareness. This is it. This is the climax of our explainer.
This is the morning his carefully constructed, step-by-step system finally shatters. His precious routine is totally derailed by the daytime disruptions of his roommates. It's a cascade of chaos. First, they lock themselves out early in the morning. Then, mid-morning, their female guests come back. An hour later, one of the women uses the bathroom and, exactly true to form, fails to flush. By the afternoon, our narrator is completely exhausted, totally half asleep from his broken circadian rhythm, and he wanders into the bathroom. And in that groggy, sleep-deprived state, he forgets his absolute cardinal rule. He forgets the blind flush. He looks into the bowl before flushing, and is abruptly slammed in the face with the very reality he spends his entire life trying to avoid. He sees it, the physical evidence of someone else's messy existence. And in that moment, he realizes a really profound truth. Once you see the mess, the everyday indignities of modern survival, you are forever implicated in it. By simply looking, he goes from getting this aloof, dignified, untouchable outsider to an active spectator of humanity's grossness. Even though he ultimately flushes it away and goes on with his day, the damage is already done. The indignity of knowing has finally breached his defenses. Which leads us directly to the story's really haunting conclusion. He suddenly recalls a couple he saw earlier having sex in an alleyway against a stack of recycling bins, something he had previously pretended he didn't see. And he asks himself this highly provocative question. When the man digs into the woman bracing herself against trash bins, are their eyes open? It's a powerful, almost tragic moment of failed self-awareness. He's wondering if the people in the alley are aware of their own indignity, of the sheer raw grit of their survival. But the real question we have to ask ourselves as we wrap this up is, who is actually blind here? Is the narrator truly seeing the world with clarity, or is he just squeezing his eyes tightly shut against the mess that he too belongs to? It leaves us with a pretty heavy final thought to carry with us. In our own lives, what messes are we pretending not to see, just so we can survive the day? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.